Jameis Winston is back at the helm in New Orleans, and now the team will need to build around him. How they can build a competitor by adding at wide receiver and offensive line. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays over Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Just visit rockauto.com and let them know that Locked On sent you. The New Orleans Saints have signed Jameis Winston to a 2-year deal, a move that they should have made from the very beginning, but it is now done, and now it's on the backs of the organization to build the offense around Jameis Winston and give him the weapons that he needs so that this team can be competitive in 2022. Now, the New Orleans Saints have not invested in wide receiver or tight end so far this offseason. And we have seen this offseason and offseason time and time again. I do expect that this will change here in 2022, especially with the team moving ahead again with Jameis Winston. The only move that they have made so far at wide receiver is tendering the restricted free agent contract of Deontay Hardy, which is a good move. Deontay Hardy should be back in the black and gold in 2022, in my opinion. You know, Michael Thomas is set to come back in 2022 as well. So there were some reports that the Saints were also working on bringing back Lil Jordan Humphrey. And what's next at that position for the New Orleans Saints is going to end up impacting their ability to be successful in 2022. Now, Jameis Winston, over the course of his 7 starts, which was really kind of like 6 games and a quarter. Remember, of course, he had a season-ending ACL injury against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers early on in that game. But over the course of those 7 games, he led the NFL in touchdown percentage, 14 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. The New Orleans Saints were up there in terms of DVOA and EPA, particularly in terms of scoring in the passing game, all of that. But all of that kind of came to a halt, of course, with Jameis Winston's injury. But the thing that I want to highlight about that is that that's what he did without Michael Thomas. That's what he did with Marquez Callaway and Traquan Smith, or really not even with Traquan Smith for a while. So Deontay Hardy and some of these other guys that they ended up sort of having to patchwork the wide receiver position with, and a tight end spot that never really got going throughout that same 2021 season. Juwan Johnson had some flashes. Adam Trautman came on and then ended up getting injured in the same game. Then he came on a little bit more toward the end. Nick Vanette kind of opened things up a little bit once he was healthy, but he wasn't able to start the season healthy either. So there weren't really a lot of options, and there wasn't a lot of health at the pass catcher roles for the New Orleans Saints. So it's now the responsibility of the organization to get that taken care of. And now in yesterday's episode, our kind of mock draft Monday was more of a mock off season. We talked about returning Jameis Winston to the New Orleans Saints on a 2-year, $32 million deal, $16 million per. Now, in reality, the New Orleans Saints do retain Jameis Winston on a 2-year deal, but only $28 million, $14 million per, which it's a good number for the team. And honestly, it's a good number for Jameis Winston, too, whose market really never started to formulate over the course of all of this other crazy quarterback business that was going on all throughout the offseason, where teams were more than willing to give up trade assets, more than they were willing to give up contract money to free agents this offseason. The New Orleans Saints included, because they jumped into that Deshaun Watson sweepstakes. And so now that that's all settled, the New Orleans Saints, depending upon what that contract structure, still have a ton of spending money here and a ton of breathing room to go out there and sign some of these players. The other things that we talked about in terms of that mock offseason were returning Terron Armstead, if at all possible, who's currently, at least at this time, on a visit with the Miami Dolphins. Hopefully he leaves Miami without a deal, because Jameis Winston is calling him and saying, hey, bro, come back to New Orleans. Hey, bro, come back to New Orleans. You have to lean on that relationship a little bit. And then you got to find the pass catchers. We talked about Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and we talked about Zach Pascal being a really good slot option for the New Orleans Saints. And unfortunately, he's now signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. So you're looking at some other slot options that are still out there. Adam Humphries, Jarvis Landry, Jamison Crowder, lots of different players. Albert Wilson. There are a lot of good players out there that could man the slot. But getting this sort of field stretching deep threat like Marquez Valdes-Scantling and going into the draft and looking for a guy like Treylon Burks, who we picked with our first round pick in yesterday's mock draft. Those are huge moves when you have Jameis Winston at quarterback who can get the ball and push the ball downfield. And I think with Pete Carmichael, who led the NFL's #1 passing offense as a play caller in 2012 when Sean Payton was suspended, with him stepping into the offensive coordinator full role as a play caller, then yeah, give these guys somebody that they can target downfield. And I think that's the thing. Regardless of who the player is, the archetype needs to be the field stretching deep threat and a slot option that can come in and challenge some of these other guys that are going to return in 2022 and pair up with Michael Thomas. Now, the good news for the New Orleans Saints is that even if Alvin Kamara is suspended for 6 games, there are still some good running backs that can catch out of the backfield that they can also pull from free agency as well as the draft. And now they're not in a situation to where they're without Alvin Kamara and potentially out their starting quarterback early on in the season as well. So Jameis Winston is your starting quarterback in 2022, barring any kind of health concerns or anything like that. Taysom Hill is not expected to be a part of the quarterback conversation, so he turns into a full-time pass catcher, effectively a full-time tight end, which would also be great for this team. So I love where this is going for the New Orleans Saints, but they're far from done. They have to get these players on the offense built around Jameis, built around this offense in order to be able to be successful in 2022. As we look at that, let's break it down a little bit further, identify some more targets that the Saints could look at, not only at wide receiver, but if they lost Terron Armstead at left tackle, what are their options? Let's break all of that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Now that you might be able to relax a little bit, now that the New Orleans Saints have their quarterback going into next year, perhaps you're ready to enjoy some college basketball. And if you want to enjoy it even more, then one of the best ways to do it is to get in on the action, which you can do over at BetOnline, betonline.net, our exclusive online sports gambling partners here over at the Locked On Podcast Network. They've got everything that you need. You want to bet on who's going to win the tournament as a whole, round by round, player performance props. They've got it all for you. All you have to do is head over to BetOnline. You can check out everything that they've got in terms of sports scores, news, podcasts, everything to help you keep on top of all the trends, all the betting trends, everything that you want, they got it for you. And if it's not just basketball that you're looking for, there's a ton more for football in terms of futures, who's going to end up on what team, who's going to be the next fired head coach, all of that. You can also get in on boxing, UFC, MMA, baseball, NHL just had a wild trade deadline. You might want to go ahead and get in on some of the shifting odds that are there too, based upon player movement. A ton for you to check out, including live betting as well as your favorite Vegas casino games as well. So head over to the website today on your laptop or your mobile device and learn more about all the trends in action over at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Luke Braun and I will be live at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday night. I should be able to get this out before then, so you can come and join us over the Locked On NFL YouTube channel because we have some choice words for the Atlanta Falcons. Even if you don't catch us live, you can catch us later there as well as wherever you get your podcast, as a matter of fact. The New Orleans Saints might be Super Bowl contenders now that they've got Jameis Winston. They have their quarterback sort of conversation figured out. Maybe not Super Bowl contenders. The thing about the Super Bowl contender thing is that it depends on what else they do. And that's what we're here to talk about. What else do the New Orleans Saints need to do in order to enter that conversation for Super Bowl contender? Because the NFC is kind of wide open right now. And most importantly, let's say this. The New Orleans Saints are contenders within the NFC South division. Because on the same day, literally within 20 minutes before the New Orleans Saints signed Jameis Winston, the Atlanta Falcons traded Matt Ryan to the Indianapolis Colts inexplicably for a 3rd-round pick. Not inexplicably. We all know why the trade happened because Matt Ryan was like, oh, okay, y'all going after Deshaun Watson. Cool. Y'all gonna get me out of here. So we know exactly what happened and how badly the Atlanta Falcons kind of fumbled the bag on that whole situation. So now they ended up bringing in an interesting signing, which we'll talk about a little bit more because it makes the Saints and Falcons rivalry a little bit more intriguing, as a matter of fact. So we'll break all that down in a moment. But with the NFC South being as wide open as it is, with the Carolina Panthers still being hapless, no real identity there in terms of what they are, even though they have a very good defense, honestly. The Atlanta Falcons are clearly looking for that next quarterback in the 2023 draft, it looks like. And yes, Tom Brady is back when it comes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that hasn't seemed to have been a problem for the New Orleans Saints over the course of the last couple of seasons. Now, Sean Payton, of course, is no longer the New Orleans Saints head coach, but Dennis Allen, who has really developed the defense that has slowed down and stumped Tom Brady, is now the head coach. So you can still kind of give the Saints a little bit of a leg up there, depending upon whether or not they're able to maintain their defensive success. And they'll have some free agency moves that they'll need to make. I mean, returning PJ Williams would be great. Bringing in Marcus May was awesome, especially after losing Marcus Williams. Still want to see them bring back Quan Alexander probably, and then figure out the interior defensive line. But so far, so good for the New Orleans Saints, depending upon what happens with Malcolm Jenkins, of course. So over on the offensive side becomes the focus. You have to add those wide receivers for Jameis Winston and for this New Orleans Saints offense in order to get things cooking. So there are a couple of ways that they can do that. We talked about Marquez Valdes-Scantling from the Green Bay Packers. Going to have to work a little hard to get him away from Green Bay. Remember, Green Bay just traded away Devontae Adams to the Las Vegas Raiders so he can go play with his best friend and Derek Carr. And now I'm sure Green Bay is going to do everything that they can to keep MVS, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, in Green Bay. So you're going to have to work a little hard, pay a little bit of interest, those types of things if you want to bring him to New Orleans. But if you can't get him, there are other field stretching options that you can look at. Will Fuller is absolutely one of them. He, like I mentioned, not the greatest hands in the world, but if you want a field stretcher, Will Fuller has been absolutely that his entire career. So you're not asking him to change his identity. You're just asking him to do it in your offense. So that is a good place that the Saints can go, and probably on a pretty cheap contract as well, likely cheaper than you would be able to pull a guy like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. The Saints were connected early on this offseason with Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry went on a visit with the Atlanta Falcons, and then maybe it looked like the Saints and Jarvis Landry weren't really as close as people anticipated at the beginning of free agency, but he should still be somebody that they're interested in as somebody that can be a complementary piece to Michael Thomas, but that can also run out of the slot for you. So he's not going to necessarily be a field stretcher, but he fits that other archetype that you want to fill, along with Jamison Crowder. We originally talked about Zach Pascal, but he is now a Philadelphia Eagle. Now, for the Philadelphia Eagles, there are a couple of players that could potentially be on the move out of that system. Guys like Jalen Reagor, guys like Quez Watkins, so on and so forth. So I would keep an eye out on any other additional movement in that Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver room. In terms of other options for the New Orleans Saints at field stretcher, there are a couple of other free agents that they could potentially look into. One of which is a little bit complicated. It's Odell Beckham Jr. Do you trust it? ACL injury in the Super Bowl as late as it can possibly get. The Los Angeles Rams trading for Allen Robinson, who effectively does the same thing that Odell Beckham Jr. does in terms of the role that he serves in offenses. So could he potentially be on his way away from the Los Angeles Rams, although the Rams have expressed at least vocal interest in keeping Odell Beckham Jr. as a part of their fold as well, considering how open the NFC is. It would be hard to compete with the Los Angeles Rams, who just won a Super Bowl, for the attention of an Odell Beckham Jr. But if he is as close, or was as close as he claims he was to signing with New Orleans this past season, before the Los Angeles Rams got involved at sort of that 11th hour, then this would be the right time to go and pursue him again. He might not be ready to get out on the field right away, right? You have the ACL injury, recovery, things like that. But if you've got Michael Thomas, if you've got Deontay Hardy, and you're not just looking at one wide receiver in free agency, of course, you're looking at several different options plus the draft, right? You have to go redundant at this position as much as you can over the course of the next, let's say, 2 months, including the draft, even beyond that, depending upon what happens. Once teams get their drafts done and release players that they no longer want to give that salary cap space to, there will be other options that will hit the market. But if you're looking for a little bit of a risk here in getting a player that has had the interest in the past of returning to the state of Louisiana, the city of New Orleans, then Odell Beckham Jr. could be an option for you. You want somebody that's a little bit more of a veteran, maybe doesn't necessarily fit the full field stretcher role, but you just want another big body to throw to. Guys like AJ Green could potentially be an option as well. But if you ask me, Marquez Valdes-Scantling is still the number one target in my mind. I'd probably put Odell Beckham Jr. and Will Fuller there. There's a lot of injury concerns with the both of them. And then you have to turn your attention to the slot. And that's where guys like Jamison Crowder, Jarvis Landry, Adam Humphries, Albert Wilson all come in as well. Plus, try to get a multi-year deal done with Deontay Hardy. The next big thing is going to be figuring out the offensive line, which could be simple, honestly. The Saints can go to the draft because they know that they have Ryan Ramczyk that they can move to left tackle, James Hurst who they could plug in at right tackle. They can go to the draft and find another left tackle like Trevor Penning if he were to drop to 18 or be in a tradable range ahead of that. Or they wait and they go for a right tackle that they can plug in and then just move Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle and say, congratulations, you're now the franchise left tackle. It's a little bit less pressing to get that position attended to if Terron Armstead signs with the Miami Dolphins or otherwise, aside from staying in New Orleans. And of course, the New Orleans Saints aren't the only team, like we mentioned, that had some quarterback moves. The Atlanta Falcons moved on from their franchise quarterback in Matt Ryan, and because of their new addition right after Jameis Winston was signed in New Orleans, the rivalry between the Saints and Falcons gets a little bit more interesting. Let's talk about why as we continue on and wrap up today's episode with a little bit of fun here on Locked On Saints. Lots of NFL teams working on their rosters, trying to fix things up for a potential 2022 title run. And maybe you're looking to fix things up on your daily driver, or maybe you've got a project that you're rebuilding as well. In either case, rockauto.com is the absolute resource for you. Head over to the website, any make, model, year, whatever it is, part, piece, accessory that you're looking for, they're going to have for you. And best of all, you're going to save 30, 50, sometimes up to even 70% what you're going to pay at some of those brick and mortar stores, the chain stores that are upcharging you because you're a do-it-yourselfer and you're not a professional and all that other stuff. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that. Head over to rockauto.com. You can choose your make, model, your year, let them know what part you're looking for, and then bam, you got options on options on options from everything that you could need for your daily driver or that project that you're rebuilding. So go and check them out over at rockauto.com. They're a family business, been helping families online for over 20 years. So now you get to support a small business in the meanwhile while you're doing it. So head over to rockauto.com today. And don't forget to let them know that Locked On sent you. We're writing Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints Atlanta Falcons rivalry has always been one that's been a little bit underrated outside of the two fan bases, the New Orleans Saints fan base and the Atlanta Falcons fan base. Now, things just got a little bit more interesting as they've continued to get more and more interesting over the course of the past few years. Now, the New Orleans Saints, within about 20 minutes of the Atlanta Falcons trading away Matt Ryan's, the Indianapolis Colts, for a third-round pick, bring back Jameis Winston as their starting quarterback, a move that was effectively considered their plan A at the beginning of the offseason. Now, on top of that, very soon after, the Atlanta Falcons bring in a new quarterback on their own 2-year deal, and this one being Marcus Mariota. Now, many of you will remember Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota were the consensus number 1, number 2 players of the 2015 draft and actually went as the top picks in that draft, with Jameis Winston going number 1 overall to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Number 2 overall to the Tennessee Titans was Marcus Mariota. Throughout that time, and since that time, Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota constantly asked about their, rivalry, things like that. Jameis Winston once telling Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman at the time on First Take, back in 2017, the only thing that I have against Marcus Mariota is that he's beaten me every time that he's played against me. Now, here we are going into 2022, 7 years later, and the two rivals, quote unquote, have entered an actual rivalry as the assumed starters for the New Orleans Saints. Jameis Winston probably more so solidified there, and then Marcus Mariota as the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Falcons are probably still going to go quarterback, I imagine, early on in the draft. Guys like Malik Willis, a guy like Kenny Pickett could be up there for them. Matt Corral, maybe? I don't know. But anyway, they could go with a rookie quarterback, and then by the time that the Saints and Falcons meet at the first time, that rookie quarterback is starting as opposed to Marcus Mariota. We'll see how it goes, right? We can never predict how all those things are going to go. But if things line up the way that they look right now, this would mean that Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, after being drafted as the top 2 selections in 2015, are now set and entrenched within an NFC South rivalry where they're going to meet 2 times per year, which I think is just a ton of fun. Now, what's going to happen here is going to be really more about what's around those 2 quarterbacks than the 2 quarterbacks themselves. Jameis Winston, I think, has the leg up at the moment because they have the good, he's got the good defense, and he has 2 weapons on offense with Michael Thomas and with Alvin Kamara. Marcus Mariota not getting a lot of help from that Atlanta Falcons defense as it presently exists. And right now, the only weapon that they have, because everyone else is basically gone, is, of course, Kyle Pitts. And maybe you can throw Cordarrelle Patterson in there, but we have to wait and see with what we saw in 2021. Was that a flash in the pan, or is that really who Cordarrelle Patterson is in that Atlanta Falcons offense? Now, of course, Calvin Ridley suspended for a year. Julio Jones is a free agent again. A very surprising situation there. And then, of course, Russell Gage has headed elsewhere. And they don't have really a running back over there. So they have a lot of things they have to figure out and sort of get built around on the offense that the Saints maybe don't. And even without Terron Armstead, I would venture to say that the Saints have the better offensive line than the Atlanta Falcons do. So the person that's probably hurt most in all of this, well, first of all, the person who's emotionally hurt most in all of this is Cam Jordan, because his best friend, 23 career sacks on Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan is now no longer within the division, but the two teams, the Saints and the Colts, are expected to meet in Indianapolis in 2023. So that is worth maybe earmarking a page for in your 2023 year. But the person that's really hurt out of all this really feels like Terry Fontenot. And that's where the rivalry started to get a little bit more interesting again over the course of the past couple of years, was to have Terry Fontenot, who is the director of college scouting for the New Orleans Saints, as well as a part of their general management team as an assistant general manager. He ends up going to Atlanta, becoming their GM. And so far, it's not been a good start for Terry. I mean, the defense has been atrocious. They trade away Matt Ryan after sort of damaging the relationship after pursuing Deshaun Watson. A lot of us were sort of looking at things coming down when it came to Deshaun Watson between the New Orleans Saints and the Atlanta Falcons. And it was like, oh, maybe Terry Fontenot is going to get a dub here over his, kind of mentor and Mickey Loomis. And then, of course, Deshaun Watson, completely 180'd on everybody and then ended up taking a ton of money over in Cleveland. And now you look at Terry Fontenot and what's happened in the next couple of days. Like, they've had trouble retaining talent in Atlanta. They ended up having to ship away Matt Ryan. They got nothing for Matt Ryan in the midst of all that. I mean, just some things there that maybe don't necessarily seem great. So that might be the person that is kind of damaged the most out of all this, aside from the Atlanta Falcons. It's great for Matt Ryan. He gets to go to Indianapolis, work with a great coach there. And then Indianapolis gets a good quarterback for hardly anything. The ones that really got hurt the most out of all this are the Atlanta Falcons. But now we get to benefit from that. The rest of us that aren't Atlanta Falcons fans or aren't invested in the Atlanta Falcons, and watching this rivalry get a little bit more interesting with those two top 2015 draft picks circling back around 7 years later and potentially playing against each other twice in 2022. Who's going to come out on top? So far, Marcus Mariota has won every matchup in which the two quarterbacks have started against one another. I expect that Jameis Winston will look to tie the record this year, though, going up against Atlanta in 2022. So there's that and so much more to look forward to even before we get to the NFL draft, right? So we still have a ton to watch the New Orleans Saints do in terms of building around Jameis Winston. How will they do that? We'll keep you up to date here on Locked On Saints. And I appreciate you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen, to go and check out that Locked On NFL Draft podcast. The guys, Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, mocked Jameson Williams to the New Orleans Saints on Monday. Go and see why, because that gets me one more step closer to having Jameis Winston, Jamison Crowder, and Jameson Williams on the same team. Cannot express how happy I would be about that. So go and check out Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube as well, to see why they took the star-studded wide receiver to New Orleans. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to break down further what the New Orleans Saints have going on. We're going to look ahead to the draft and look at some more of these archetypes, and of course break down any signings. Will Terron Armstead end up in Miami, or will he return to New Orleans? We might have an answer as soon as Wednesday. So we'll have all that coming up for you as we continue on here on Locked On Saints. Thanks as always for making me a part of your day, and for everything you need between these episodes for your New Orleans Saints. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.